Hello, and welcome to No Password Required. I'm Bill McQueen. My co-host is Ernie Ferraresso, and our guest today is Allan Liska, an intelligence analyst with the cybersecurity consulting firm Recorded Future. We'll tell you more about Allan and the kind of work he does to help stop cyber criminals, cyber crime in just a minute. But first, those of you who are watching and joining us on video no doubt have noticed we had a little bit different look today. We are not in studio. We are, like many, if not most of you, and millions of other people, working remotely. Social distancing, that's the way of the world right now. Zoom, which is the app we're using, and others like Facebook and Teams, have certainly made working remotely easier, but at what cost to security? The potential risks when your employees and your networks are spread out like never before, and why Allan prefers the blue team to the red team. Today's episode of No Password Required.
No Password Required is a presentation of Cyber Florida, located on the Tampa campus of the University of South Florida.
Bill McQueen and Ernie Ferraresso here. Ernie, how you doing?
Bill, I'm living the dream every day.
That's good. That's good. Depending on what the dream is, I guess.
That's right.
Our guest today is Allan Liska of Recorded Future. Allan, welcome to No Password Required.
Thank you. And I'm really excited to be here. And Ernie, with that unicorn behind you, obviously you fulfilled the dream.
Be careful. He shows up every now and again.
For our audience, Allan has 2 decades of experience in enterprise network and data center design. He's been in cybersecurity and monitoring for 16 years. He has authored or co-authored books and manuals on system security. With that kind of background, Allan, did anyone in the cybersecurity industry, Ernie, you may want to join in on this, did anyone foresee this happening where it seems like overnight, it wasn't overnight, but it certainly seemed like it happened very quickly, that almost everyone is working remotely? Was there a contingency anywhere to deal with this?
So, and honestly, for a lot of organizations, I think it did actually happen overnight. I know of a number of organizations that had 48 hours to put together a remote work plan. So, to answer your question, nobody thought about that. And honestly, if you had told me, if you had brought me in as a consultant and said, we need to have a contingency plan for all of our employees to work from home, I would have said, please don't do that. You have much more pressing and important things to do than figure out how you're going to have everybody work from home, because what are the likelihoods of that? Although I will tell you, there is one example. I did some consulting work for a propane company that had one of their warehouses explode, basically. And so for 2 months while it was being rebuilt, they had to have all of their employees work from home, and we're trying to figure out how to do that. This was several years ago. So that would be one case where up until now I would have said, yeah, you should probably have that work from home contingency. If your office is adjacent to a warehouse where you're storing dangerous chemicals, then you probably need to have that kind of contingency. But other than that, I would not imagine you would need to have one.
I mean, I just say it's really, you mentioned, like you said, it blew up overnight. I mean, literally. You're right. I mean, when we started working remote, as you can tell, I'm, typically my office, I don't have a unicorn sitting behind me, but today I do. We went from on November 12th, March 12th, I'm in the office. March 13th, I'm at home, but I'm still at home. And everybody, fortunately, we were using Microsoft Teams, but a lot of people went on to Zoom and some of these other platforms. There's been a lot of guidance coming out about it, hey, how do you secure it? And I know there's a lot of issues. I mean, what do you see these as the predominant risks that people are running? And especially, I mean, I also like to think about, one day, kind of the joke goes, one day this war is going to be over. Well, one day the COVID is going to be a thing in the past. And so how do we, are we going to go back, or is this the future? And I mean, there's got to be a tremendous amount of questions, not just on the actual system security, but just on the, the privacy. What's it going to be like? So, from a cybersecurity side, man, what do you think this is going to look like? On, what are we at? May the 6th, 2021. Are we safer? Are we worse?
Yeah, so a lot of really good questions. So it's interesting because while there's been a lot of focus on Zoom and other team apps in terms of their security, the real threats are the connect into work infrastructure that have
Yeah.
had to been stood up, almost immediately. We have so many organizations that I've talked to that they didn't have a VPN in place. And so they either rushed out to get a VPN system, or they're like, oh, well, we have Citrix and we have remote desktop licenses on the shelf. So we'll just enable those and have everybody connect directly to their desktops. And unfortunately, what that means is we've seen an increase in the number of exposed Citrix and remote desktop protocol, Microsoft's remote desktop protocol systems on the internet. And we know that those are heavily targeted by attackers. Every time there's a new Citrix vulnerability, within 72 hours or so, attackers have released an exploit for it and have started scanning and looking for those. Same with remote desktop protocol, whether it's through credential stuffing or exploiting older versions or whatever. That type of remote infrastructure is a problem. Now, yes, there are also problems associated with the teamwork apps. Zoom the number of vulnerabilities have been very quickly discovered in Zoom. And part of that is it went from, a fourth or fifth place, team app to suddenly the most well-known team app in the history of the world. So unfortunately with that kind of attention, you're going to get a whole lot of people suddenly looking to see what kind of risks you pose, so while those aren't necessarily as critical in terms of protecting the broad organization, it is important because those vulnerabilities can lead to having unauthorized access to meetings that have sensitive information, et cetera, and that is another threat of exposure. So that if an unwanted intruder joins your Zoom meeting, especially if it's a big all hands meeting when you're announcing earnings or something like that internally before you release them publicly, that could potentially hurt your company. You could have that whole meeting exposed to the internet, things that you may not want to get out broadly.
Allan, do you know or have you heard of any breaches, whether it's crashing a Zoom meeting or hacking into a system, that are directly connected to the problem of a much larger remote workforce?
Yeah, absolutely. We're seeing that increasingly become common. So Zoom, not so much. Unfortunately or unfortunately, most people that are using Zoom hacking are doing it so that they can, share porn in people's meetings because they think that's funny. And it's a
You haven't been in
nuisance
the
and it's
meetings
a
that I've been
pain,
in.
but it's not materially hurting a business. What we have seen though is a number of hospitals. So like my wife, for example, works for a large hospital organization here in Virginia. And they're entirely Citrix and remote desktop protocol. That's how they're getting into their networks. And not hers, but we have seen other hospitals like that have now been impacted by ransomware, and they got in using these the ransomware actors got in using these vulnerabilities in Citrix and remote desktop protocol to gain access to the hospital. Because go figure, cyber criminals are scum, and they're of course going to attack hospitals during a pandemic.
Yeah, no, so you mentioned they're coming in. Are they using the RDP and the Zoom or the remote access? Is that like they're delivering the? Are they using that to move laterally once they're in, or is that their actually entry point?
So they're using that as their entry point, and then moving around the network.
Really?
So yeah, so what we're seeing is a big growth right now in what we call big game hunting ransomware. And what that is so it used to be all the way back in 2018, if you can remember that far back. Ransomware actor hits a desktop, they encrypt the desktop, they're done. Everything's over. The way big game hunting works is ransomware actors want to make more money just like everybody else. You can make more money by encrypting more systems. So what they do is they use that Citrix or remote desktop protocol or whatever their point of entry is to gain initial access. Then they use standard tools like PSExec and other administrative tools to learn and understand the network, get network passwords, especially administrative passwords. And then once they understand the network, they will use that access that they've gained either through the Active Directory or through a batch file or something like that to spread the ransomware to as many systems as possible. So they want to encrypt instead of one system, they want to encrypt hundreds of thousands.
Yeah, so they're not. Yeah, they're not using the old, the common vector now, which is like the phishing attack, and somebody's clicking on a link. They're just exploiting the inherent vulnerability in the infrastructure from the get-go.
Right. Now, there's still phishing is still a common way to deliver ransomware.
But now you got another way. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. But they've found other ways to gain access, and that's one of the problems with paying the ransom is you pay the ransom. We see all the videos of the hackers that get all their money and they go out and buy Maseratis and stuff like that. Those are script kiddies. The good ones, they take their money and they reinvest it in buying exploits, buying better tools, so they make themselves better for the next attack.
Yeah.
And so this type of attack means that they're encrypting lots and lots of systems at once, and they can demand more money in the ransom, but it also cripples the organization that got hit because they can't do anything now. I mean, that's what we're seeing right now with the Toll brothers in Australia, or the Toll company in Australia that got hit. They their IT systems are completely offline right now. And so there were reports of people not being able to get packages delivered and stuff like that because there's thousands of systems that are encrypted.
So it's not new forms of attack. It's just the same stuff, but they have more opportunity. Am I hearing that?
Exactly. Yes. Right. So what this does is, and that's precisely what we've seen is, at least in the short term, the attackers are just, almost like putting a new skin on a new case on your iPhone, right? It's still the same iPhone underneath. It's still the same vulnerabilities and everything underneath. They're just an expanded attack surface that they're now taking advantage of.
Yeah.
In a sentence or two, we're about to go to a break. What are you telling your clients? You've got people working across the country, maybe across the world. What are the top one or two things that you're telling clients? This is what you have to do.
So unfortunately, what I have to tell people is very boring. Is that just like anything else, you need to understand what you have in your network, what you have in your expanded network, and then you need to prioritize patching those systems that are exposed to the internet. So it's basic blocking and tackling of good asset inventory and then good vulnerability and patch management, which won't get you a talk at Black Hat, it won't get you a talk at RSA, but it'll stop 95% of these attacks that are out there. It's just really hard to do well. So, saying it over and over again doesn't make it any easier to get better, but it really is what you have to do to protect yourself, especially now.
All right, so how does somebody become a cyber guy? Well, we'll find out in the case of Allan Liska and Ernie as well, when No Password Required continues.
No Password Required is a presentation of Cyber Florida, located on the Tampa campus of the University of South Florida.
We are back. I'm Bill McQueen with Ernie Ferraresso. This is No Password Required. And our guest today is Allan Liska of Recorded Future. Allan, we talked a little bit about your professional background, but what about your education? Did you study computer engineering, computer security, or were you on a different track when you were in school?
I was a sociology major.
Of course.
Yeah, so this was the 90s. There was no cybersecurity program, and I had gone to an all boys school for 12 years. I was not about to get into computer science or engineering like all my friends did, because there were no women in those classes. I'm glad to see that that's changed now, but no, I was going to go place where there were lots and lots of women. And sociology was a fun fit for me. I really love studying how people, how societies think and work. And I got to program because we did a lot of programming, believe it or not, even though it was the 90s, on punch cards with SAS and SPSS. Because a lot of the data science, a lot of the stuff, I went to University of Maryland, and we had like a close relationship with the Census Bureau and stuff, and they still had a bunch of data on data cards. Not punch, they were still they were Scantrons at that point, but it was still data cards.
Ooh, blazing a path into the 20th century there.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so what was it about cybersecurity that drew you, and why are you still doing it? What holds you here?
So I've always been good at breaking into things. That, like, my friends would call me if they forgot something at school and they needed to figure out how to get in. Sorry, Mom. So I was a very good criminal. I didn't break the law most of the time.
Fractured.
Right, exactly. It turns out that I happened to be really good at that. And so when I left University of Maryland, I got a job at the Survey Research Center, which was on campus. And I became the network guy. And I became the network guy solely because I was the only one who was willing to crawl under the desks and plug the cables in. So it was a Novell network. So because I didn't mind getting dirty, I became the network guy. From there, I got hired at UUNet, which is now Verizon, but it was one of the first ISPs. And I started off in the help desk. Then I went to like dial-up help desk, helping people configure modems and listening for beeps and so on. Then I did DNS support, web hosting support, wound up working for the Network Operations Center. So kind of, got a whole overview of everything. And then when the .com crash happened, and we, at the time we were owned by WorldCom, and, thanks Bernie for that. A friend of mine, Norm Laudermilch, who was the CISO at Riptech, asked me if I wanted to come work in their SOC. And I was like, I don't know anything about being a SOC analyst. And he's like, yeah, but you know all the network protocols and everything else. That's what we need, is more people that know how to do that. So that's how I learned how to configure firewalls and IDSs and signatures and so on. So I spent time doing that. That's basically the transition from sociologist to network guy to security guy.
So has that sociology background, has that helped you any? I mean, I imagine you mentioned, you have that, I don't want to call it a criminal streak. Does that help you? I mean, is that kind of, when you think about things, I mean, it has to, I have to believe it allows you to say, hey, wait a minute, that seems like an easy thing to do. Is somebody going to do that, or what to look for?
So one of the things that it has done that I think is really helpful broadly is it's helped with understanding that not everybody thinks the same way that I do. So I spent some time working for the government and doing analysis work for the government. And I didn't always understand the motivation of the sort of the other nation state threat actors.
Yeah.
I knew that the motivation wasn't always the same as my motivation. Yeah. So from that perspective, I don't always understand what the different points of view are, and I am in no way, shape, or form like a foreign policy expert. In fact, I'll get asked questions about, well, what are the motivations behind these Chinese guys or these Russian guys or whatever all the time. I can't answer that question, but I know that it's probably different than what I think. And so in that respect, it's definitely helped. Being at least aware of why there's more cybercrime in certain areas like Brazil or Estonia or Iran, sort of hotspots like that, definitely makes a difference, and it allows you to kind of understand more of what is out there than because we still, a lot of times when we think of a hacker, we think of the 400-pound guy in his mom's basement, and understanding that that's not the case, that the social dynamics are very, very different than what they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago, et cetera.
Yeah, and that's right. I think that's interesting that you mentioned that it's not the stereotype, and I do like that idea that you talked about, that understanding that there are broader perspectives, and you in that, not letting your biases shape where you think this is going to go or why they think that they're going to do it. But I have to believe that trying to understand the motivations behind the attacker probably helps a lot, but that it also allows you to get, I think, having that clearer perspective that it could be beyond what I think it is, but letting the data play into that. What's the craziest thing you've seen? You mentioned the nation state guys. How do they compare to some of the normal or run of the mill people?
Well, so and that goes to part of it. So, for example, I used to run a training program for new security people who came to go work for the government, right?
Yeah.
And we would set them up with, okay, here's how an exploit works. Here's how you attack a vulnerable system, et cetera, just to better understand what is, what kind of what's going on and how the attackers think and work. And I got to do this once, and then I was told I wasn't allowed to do it anymore because it hurt too many people's feelings. The first time I ran, at the end of the training session, I ran a capture the flag session. And I knew what tools we'd given. It was a closed network. I knew what tools we'd given them access to. So I made sure I hardened all the systems so that none of them could break into it. And then, I, started the capture the flag off with here's Steve, this is Steve's network. You need to break into Steve's network. You have 3 hours. And I'd let everybody get super frustrated for all 3 hours, not be able to get in. They'd work at it, they try. And then I'd come in at the end of the 3 hours, and I'd go up to Steve and I'd say, anybody break into your network? And he'd say no. And I'd say, here's $100. What's your root password? And he'd give me the root password, and I get in. And that's what you have to think about, that's different with a nation state versus a sort of a common cyber criminal. The nation state can bribe somebody to gain access to your network. So all the defenses in the world aren't going to be as effective as making sure that you also have protections against insider threat and other things, because you have to be able to think the way a kind of a nation state actor will, which is, if they want to target you, they're not just going to limit themselves to exploits. They're going to come up with anything they can in order to gain that access.
So there are no gentlemanly rules in the world of state.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Well, you talked about you were a sociology major who wanted to meet more girls. Pretty typical for anyone in any college male. Ernie got into cybersecurity because the military told him that's what you were going to do. Is that pretty much it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It was, hey, you're going to go do this. Okay, sounds cool. It didn't even say it sounds cool.
It was just, what do you like to do when you're not chasing bad guys?
Yeah, that's you, Allan. What do you?
Sorry,
what do you do? What do you do on the outside?
So I lead a non-technical existence on the outside. My wife and I spend a lot of time in our garden. Big, huge wine drinkers. So we love wine. Here in Virginia, we've got a lot of wonderful wineries, and so I love spending time with kind of not that we can right now, but at the local wineries. We've got a ton of friends that we'll, go hang out with for a few hours at a different winery. And then, my whole life has been filled with, a combination of Marvel, DC, and baseball. Nats games whenever possible, Marvel movies, DC movies, although not so much DC movies right now, but, so that kind of stuff.
Okay. I think it's interesting. You were mentioning that your friends knew you were good at breaking into things, but you say you prefer the blue team, the defense, as opposed to the red team, the guys trying to hack a system. I'm going to guess most people in cybersecurity would prefer trying to get in. I mean, they had the same thing like when you were younger, you enjoyed getting into places. What about the defense do you prefer?
So part of it is, in a way, being on the red team isn't as much of a challenge, because if I'm a bad guy and you tell me that I have to break into X, so whatever that company is, if I say, I have to break into IBM. IBM has thousands of offices all around the world. They have, probably tens of thousands of exposed systems, hundreds of thousands of exposed systems on the internet. It's relatively easy to find the vulnerability if you're just saying, go get this network and break into this network. So I find the vulnerability and I exploit it. Ta-da, I'm in. That's not very, to me, it's exciting, yes, but it's not as satisfying. I think the blue team has a much harder job, because on the blue team, you have to be able to secure all of those systems and then all of the people in the network. And that is really hard to figure out how to secure people. I mean, that's why phishing is such an effective tactic against organizations, even the best organizations, because no matter what, there's always somebody that will fall for a phishing email. So if you can't stop that email before it gets to the person, somebody somewhere is going to click on the link. And if you don't have the right compensating controls or anything else in your network, and you may, most places don't have IBM security budget. So most places can't put the best side, compensating controls and the best training and everything else in place. So being able to defend the network on a shoestring budget with limited resources, not enough people, is so much harder. And to me, it's much more rewarding when you're able to successfully do that, because you're going to have so many misses on the blue team that when you can get those wins, it feels really good.
Well, and we were talking before we started recording, you mentioned when we talked on the phone early that the blue team has to be right all the time. The red team just has to get it right once.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And so you're not going to be right all the time on the blue team, but you want to be able to recover when you're not right and get back out there and do that. And we've talked about this before. To me, the best red team and blue teams work together cooperatively. Like, you should definitely razz the other side when you've managed to succeed or caught them and managed to stop them. But then you need to work together. The razzing is 5 minutes. The 10 hours is, how do we fix this? How do we put something in place to protect it, and so on. So enjoy the razzing, but then spend the time actually working with each other to make it better.
So what's the best red team put down?
Putting down the red team, putting
put
down
it down.
somebody on the red team.
What's the best? Yeah, what's the best? The best razzing. What's the best? Yeah, what's the best trash talk you can tell them?
I mean,
call them script kiddies. That's a script kiddie move. That's
I mean that's basically it.
That's it. That's all you got.
I mean, yeah.
That cuts right through them.
What kind of script kiddie are you? Is good, or I prefer I prefer to call somebody a rookie or a noob or whatever. I definitely like, again, for me being a lifelong geek, I instead of calling somebody a rookie, I prefer, that's kind of a JarJar move.
Nice.
That
Getting a lot.
that script is so bad that Warner Brothers is optioning it for a DC movie. You know, that kind of thing. You know, those are the kind of things that I like to come back with. The problem is now that I'm an old man, all the kids are half my age, and so I feel kind of bad insulting them.
No, never feel bad. You should never feel bad, because the best part about it is some of those, they may go over their heads. That's perfect.
Yes,
That adds more to the impact.
Yeah, I made a Gilligan's Island joke to some of the younger team a couple weeks ago, and then nobody got it.
Nothing.
I felt bad.
I get this. I get a typical one if I make a Dirty Dozen reference.
Oh yeah, that.
Yeah, it's lost.
Yeah.
You know, I'm gonna be sad for the day when a Chuck Norris reference falls on deaf ears. Then, I mean, that's kind of why the beard is here. It's an homage, you know, to Chuck Norris.
So I don't know if you know this, and I don't want to plug a third party while I'm here.
By all means.
Cameo now has Chuck Norris on it for $250. So if you want to send somebody a Chuck Norris video, it would only cost you $250.
See, that's. I'm moved by that. Because I might just have them send a message to me.
Our guest this week on No Password Required is Allan Liska, who is an intelligence analyst with Recorded Future. We've been talking about a number of things, but now the tough part. It's a segment we call the Lifestyle Polygraph, where we get to know a little bit more about our guests. Some of them, you inadvertently jumped the gun on a couple of them, but this is Ernie's bailiwick, so Ernie, take it away.
Yes, as you are probably aware, the Lifestyle Polygraph is an important step in gaining access to national security information. So, as we like to put it, we're going to determine who you are through a series of questions.
Fantastic.
So, and there quick choices here. Ready?
Yes.
These, by the way, we prepared these before this conversation started. So, just so you know, these were crafted by the most savvy psychological analysts we have, otherwise known as Rex and I.
Fantastic.
So here we go. First question: Marvel or DC?
DC Comics, because I'm a lifelong Green Arrow fan. Marvel movies.
But Marvel movies, really? Yes. Just from storyline, cinema, or?
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that you could put together a whole coherent story over, 12 years and have it be good from start to finish with a couple of minor exceptions. I can barely concentrate for 12 minutes, much less 12 years. So, not to mention that, my son is getting ready to graduate high school. We've gone to see every one of those movies on opening day. From the first Iron Man all the way to Endgame. So like I have pictures of us in our Marvel shirts, sometimes with my wife, sometimes without, depending on the superhero. And so that's going to be like a permanent part of our father-son bonding.
Yeah, well, I usually have my Tony Stark Industries T-shirt on. So nice. All right, good answer there, sir. All right, here's another one. This is a more coffee or Red Bull?
So I'm more of a tea drinker
there you go.
Than either. And I can't do Red Bull anymore. I'm way too old for that. The heart palpitations. So tea is my preferred. I will drink coffee, never Red Bull.
What kind of tea? I mean, is it like a black tea, green tea,
black tea?
Black tea.
Black tea. I'll go with the standard Picard Earl Grey.
Well played, sir. Well played.
I try.
Yeah. Here's one a little bit more challenging. John Hughes or Kevin Smith?
That is really tough. John Cusack's one of my favorite actors, and he's been in a couple of John Hughes movies. Mm-hmm. But I think overall, I got to go Kevin Smith. What gives him the edge? I loved watching Comic Book Men when that was on the air.
Yeah.
After The Walking Dead, I thought that was a really funny show.
So you're getting, what is it, Buddy Jesus, as
Yeah.
opposed to yeah. That's excellent. All right, and here we go. Here's another one. Which movie quote makes your heart go faster? Here we are. You ready?
Yes.
Shall we play a game?
Oh.
Or that's no moon.
Oh, so tough. I mean, that's no moon is going to win out, but just barely. The Shall We Play a Game is good. Now, I'm glad you didn't ask me throw a third one in there, Avengers Assemble, because that might actually win out. As much as Star Wars has been a huge part of my life. When Captain America said that in Endgame, spoilers.
That's all you have to say. Spoiler alert.
Yeah, right. I was like, I think I clapped in the movie, which is something I don't normally do. So.
Well, that's excellent.
I've got one.
Oh, please.
We're recording this the week of May the 4th. May the 4th. Give me your best or maybe your worst Star Wars joke.
So there are so many bad ones.
Well, you're a dad, so you're okay. That you just call bad jokes dad jokes. It's fine.
Yes, dad jokes, absolutely. But I'm sure don't Boba Fett, because I'll be able to come up with a joke for you.
Oh,
Worse?
Oh, that's good. That's rich.
So, I mentioned earlier that, my wife and I are big fans of Virginia wineries, and a lot of them are shut down now because of the pandemic. So we've been doing everything we can to support them. So I hosted a virtual Petit Verdot tasting with 4 of the winemakers on Monday. And one of the requirements was you had to bring at least one Star Wars joke with you, since we were doing it on May the 4th. That was a lot of fun, because it was like basically hanging out with your friends drinking, only we got to hear all the technical details about wine growing and winemaking. And surprisingly, because it's Virginia wine and it's not nearly as popular as California or Bordeaux or any of those places, we had like 150 people show up for the webinar. So that was pretty nice.
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. I mean, did somebody say, Luke, this is not your Cabernet? Something like that?
Right. Yeah. So a lot of jokes like that. And yes, we asked somebody to talk about the 2014 vintage, and all the old winemakers couldn't remember. So we have one younger winemaker, and I went with, Katie, you're our only hope for remembering 2014.
Nice.
All right. We will be back with more from Allan Liska and find out a little bit more about Recorded Future when No Password Required continues.
No Password Required is a presentation of Cyber Florida, located on the Tampa campus of the University of South Florida.
We are back. Our guest today is Allan Liska. He is an intelligence analyst with Recorded Future. I'm Bill McQueen, along with Ernie Ferraresso. Your company, Recorded Future, kind of evolved into cybersecurity. Is that correct? And explain how that happened.
Sure. So the idea for Recorded Future actually came to our CEO while he was on the treadmill in 2009. And the idea was, if you could record everything that's happening on the internet, could you use that to predict whatever? In the initial business case, could you predict brand sentiment or predict things that were potentially going to happen to your organization? And so that's kind of how the company got started. But then what we quickly realized is that so many people were using us for cybersecurity that, in effect, we were a cybersecurity company. And so we've continued to evolve and grow that business using a combination of artificial intelligence, machine learning, and then expertise. We have people that have expertise in in Chinese operations, in Russian operations, in my case, in cyber criminal, in cybercrime, vulnerability management, reverse engineering, etc. And we take data from just hundreds of thousands, probably billions of sources at this point, and we kind of cobble that together and then present it to our clients in kind of I hate to use the term because it's so overused, but almost like a single pane of glass. So, we saw this on Twitter, we saw this on Reddit, we saw this in an underground market, and we saw this over on ZDNet, but we're going to combine it all into one, and then we're going to present it to you, and here's what you need to know type thing.
Yeah, you mentioned you mentioned artificial intelligence. How does that, how do you guys leverage that? Is it distilling things down, cooking it down to manageable levels, or making predictive predictive analysis?
So it's a combination of the two. So what our artificial intelligence does is it takes it does the data collection. So trying to collect everything on the internet would be impossible. You start with what's on the public facing internet, what's on Twitter, what's on paste sites, what's on code repositories, underground markets, etc. Trying to do all of that would be really, really difficult. So what the artificial intelligence does, and this works in conjunction with kind of machine learning, where we constantly are care and feeding the artificial intelligence, is it takes the stuff that is relevant to badness and brings it into our platform for our clients to look at. But then what you have to do is you also have to help the clients understand the risk of the badness that they're seeing. So I use the example all the time. You could have a remote executable vulnerability in squirrel mail, which still exists, even though I don't know of anybody that actually uses it. That is going to have a really low risk because most organizations don't use squirrel mail. On the other hand, if you have a remote code executable exploit for Exchange, that is going to have a really high risk. So even though both of those vulnerabilities may be scored a 10 by CVSS scoring, they're not the same in terms of the actual risk to the internet at large, et cetera. So we can help you understand what the actual risk is, and that's what our artificial intelligence does. It looks at things like prevalence, it looks at reliability of a source, and it provides a risk score in an automatic fashion to our clients that they can then view in the portal, or my preference, using our API, they can incorporate into whatever tool they're using. Because one of the things that is really important to me is I don't want to give people another console to look at, because that's a big problem in a SOC right now. Is you walk into any SOC and any analyst has 50 different tabs open, and if you don't catch an event in the tab that you happen to be looking at right then, there's a pretty good chance you're going to miss it. So it's more important for me that the intelligence be in whatever that main tab is, whether that's your SIM, whether that's whether that's your firewall, whether that's your IDS, whatever it is that you're primarily looking at, you want your intelligence there so that you don't have to go to a second tab in order to compare the two.
Allan, the COVID-19 and the challenges of working remotely is not only have we talked about it, but it's dominating talk in the industry. Beyond that, any emerging trends that you've identified or your company has identified, either from what the criminals are doing differently or new, or how you're responding to it?
So, and I know you guys are going to feel really bad about this, but cyber criminals are struggling right now. It's weird because
that's a shame.
Yeah, I know, it's awful. It's weird because we have this expanded workforce, we have this expanded vulnerability or target of opportunity, and so the sort of the upper end bad guys are actually having a grand old time just breaking into things left and right. But sort of the novice, the new people, they're having a harder time because there isn't as much left over for them. And so oddly enough, we're seeing a lot of sales on the dark web right now. People trying to sell their tools very cheaply, offering discounts. The online drug markets have been just completely devastated because people aren't able to ship into some countries now. And I had no idea this was a thing, but apparently the bad guys on these underground forums move their product via regular postal mail. And I guess they just hope that it doesn't get caught or whatever. But we're seeing just prices slashed in the drug forums and in some of those. So that's a really interesting trend. You wouldn't think with the attack surface being so expanded that there would be people that are struggling, but again, the ones that suck at their job are having a hard time adapting to this, and they're not making any money right now.
That's funny that it's the COVID crisis is impacting the regular economy, but also this underground economy, and of course the other underground economy doesn't have any of the bulwarks, whether you call it bailouts or corporate governance or tax enhancements. So that's if people want to say that over here is the real world, so to speak, and we shouldn't have all these things going on. Hey, this is what happens when you don't. You can see the whole thing collapse. Yeah, that's
right,
interesting.
Exactly.
Interesting parallels.
No stimulus checks for the black hatters, I guess.
Unless they can steal them, which is a big thing that we're seeing right now. So that is something that I warn people right now to be really careful of. There was just a great example that CoFence, a phishing company, posted in their blog today of the IRS sending an email, a fake IRS email that looked real, looked like it had an IRS URL in it and everything. That fill out your information here and we'll send you your stimulus check. So one of those where, yes, the promise of, there's either additional stimulus, or if you didn't get a stimulus, it's waiting for you. Give me your banking information. Give us your banking information, and we'll deposit for you. So that's one of those things I urge people to be very, very careful of right now. The IRS will not send you an email saying that you need to give them information in order to get your check. They have your information already.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's the best way for someone to get in contact with you, Allan?
So I'm on Twitter at UUAllan, UUALLAN, and then you can always email me, allan@recordedfuture.com. I'm always happy to answer any questions that anybody has. And if it's something I can't answer, we have a whole roster of experts that I can reach out to and see if they can get help. And of course, you can go to our website, www.recordedfuture.com.
Well, thank you for being our guest today on No Password Required. Allan Liska is an intelligence analyst for Recorded Future. For Ernie Ferraresso, I'm Bill McQueen. Thank you for joining us.
No Password Required is a presentation of Cyber Florida, located on the Tampa campus of the University of South Florida. To hear other episodes of No Password Required, visit cyberflorida.org/podcast.